Is it smart to put vintage pickups in a modern guitar? Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. That's the question we're going to answer today, because I found this gorgeous custom on Reverb, and it just happens to be loaded with some nice 70s and 80s pickups. Now, whether or not you consider that vintage or not, I'll let you guys fight about that in the comments section, because there's a few different ways you can look at the term vintage and antique. Sometimes it goes based on when their golden era was, not necessarily just what time has passed. However, there's some people who are considering early 2000s vintage at this point, so yeah, in the guitar market, it's a little strange, but I only bring that up to give us some time to look at this cool guitar. So, what kind of Les Paul custom comes with a super nice quilty maple top like this? Well, believe it or not, this is a 68 reissue. After this version of the Les Paul body shape goes away around 1960-ish, it's not until 1968 when they bring it back. And did they look like this? No, not at all. But it's based on the specs. How does a 68 Les Paul vary from a regular Les Paul custom over here? The answer to that question actually varies depending on what era you're talking about. This is an early 2000s, so as compared to an early 2000s custom, it's going to have the long neck tenon underneath your neck pickup. But this one's still true today. It'll have a genuine ABR1 post-mounted bridge. Generally speaking, the 68 reissues have a much chunkier neck profile to them. This one's definitely a big 50s feeling neck. It'll actually be custom shop produced, because you got to remember it's around 2004 2005-ish when all customs make it to the custom shop, but when this one was birthed, regular Les Paul customs were just Gibson USA products. That's a little known fact that a lot of people have forgotten about history. But another way to easily identify it is the style of serial number. You can't read this with the year, day serial system. The Gibson USA produced ones you can. But don't worry, even our 68 reissue style has its own way to read it. So the first two tell you the year. So 02 in this case will mean 2002. The last one tells you what model they're reissuing. Gibson actually has a nice serial number page where you can look up what all those codes mean, from SGs and juniors all the way down to the 68 reissue, LPC. And then these three kind of middle digits tell you what production number it is. So for 2002, this is production number 21 of the 68 reissue customs. Now for me, I've always liked the 57 and 68 reissue customs just a little bit more than your regular one, because they just feel a little bit different. Maybe it comes down to the neck profile or the choices of woods that they used in the custom shop. They always just felt a little bit higher quality to me. And then of course you get limited editions and cool ones like this that happen to have a crazy quilty maple top. Now if you're curious between a 68 and a 57 reissue, the 57s get the mahogany top, and usually it's a black finish, but they've done a bunch of stuff from faded cherries to 3 pickup ones with the Bigsby's, whereas on a 68 it still has the maple top of a regular Les Paul custom. Well, for 2002, this guitar should have a COA, but it's one of those large paper ones, and those always get lost, so we do not have it. But this one's a little bit more player's grade. We got a couple of nicks and dings that we'll talk about on the workbench. I found this interesting. That wasn't in the listing. Somebody apparently moved our strap button at one point in time and then filled it in with a piece of mahogany that has kind of a cool chatoyancy to it. It goes from dark to light. They've also removed the pick guard for obvious reasons. Looks like changed up our knobs. Upgraded our case to a version of the lift-in reissue. That's nice. And as we talked about earlier, it gave us some special pickups. So let's go ahead and throw this one onto the workbench to learn more about it. This was one of those guitars where you didn't realize just how dirty it was until after you polished it up, and now look at this top. It's definitely dancing a lot more. But I made the decision to remove the poker chip to kind of make it look like an Ultima. If you don't know what that is, check out this beautiful 2014. It's got the additional abalone, and many a times they don't get the poker chip, among other things. I figured, hey, if the pick guard's lost, we might as well remove that too, but I'll put that in the case if somebody wanted to put it on. Because even after all the polishing, you can still see some remnants of scratches from the chip being there. But let's go ahead and check out our pickups. What do we got in the neck? A June of 1982 Tim Shaw PAF. Nice. Now most of the gold has been worn off of it, but you can still tell that's how it started life. And what do you got in the bridge? Looks like September 12th, maybe 1978, so that is a Ttop in the bridge. The gold is pitted on the front, but mostly there. That pickup reads 7.53k ohms within the circuit. The neck a little less at 729, and in the middle for fun, 3.7. Now another difference between a regular custom and a 68 reissue comes down to some of the plastics they use. They're a little bit thicker, but to me, this looks like the rings have been replaced. In fact, that might be the true reason why we're missing the pickguard. It could have started life with black plastics. But at least it looks like they utilized the correct style pickup rings as far as the holes lining up, not using an ugly metric ring or something. But inside the neck pickup cavity, we can see our long neck tenon, the maple block capping off our truss rod route. And just a small note here, this also depends on the era that you're talking about, because modern day customs, I think it's around 2019 when they switched those back into there. There was a period in time when that was an exclusive feature to the specific year reissues, but nothing too much going on in our bridge pickup cavity. But a difference even yet to today is a regular custom will have at least 9-hole weight relief, whereas the year reissue ones are solid. And this is honestly quite a pretty chunky guitar. But then moving on to the bridge and tailpiece, I got kind of a little bit of a shock. So it seems like somebody wanted a real 68 reissue, or just outfit it all with vintage parts, because this is not a 2000s era Gibson APR1. This is like 70s into the 80s. So that in and of itself is a vintage part, and you can tell that due to the branding on the back. Now that said, this bridge is minorly collapsed. I don't think you're going to really notice it too much, but something that's worth disclosing. As far as the mounts and the body and the thumb wheels, that looks like the usual style from this era. You can see someone's slightly marred the top over there, utilizing some sort of a tool for adjustment at some point. And then the tailpiece, usually the reissues get the lightweight, but this is full weight, and maybe it was sold to the guy as vintage, but nah, that's not a 70s or 80s part. But I'm pretty confident that's not the original bridge here, but it's definitely nice and aged. As far as the knobs, they look early 2000s, so it's possible they were replaced early on, or maybe this was a custom order with the cream plastics. It's totally possible. But these are your amber bonnet knob style, and it currently does not have any thumb bleeders on it. I know what you're thinking. You've fallen in love with this. Will it be for sale? Yes, it will. But I want you to be well aware this was used. It's got nicks and dings. It has those scratch marks over there. There's quite a few dings down here. There's a very large impression by the bridge over there, where even if you install the pickguard on it, that would still be visible. With the pickguard off, you can see where one was resting on top of the binding and the finish go a little bit weird. This was used, but not necessarily abused. You're going to see a lot of worming marks on the back, but we'll just let the light dance around this for a minute, just in case you are interested in being the next owner of this gorgeous 68 reissue. But you can see you've got the nice 7-ply binding along the top. That also helps show you how slightly yellowed over the lacquer is. Now moving on from our mahogany body, maple top, we've got the mahogany neck with ebony fretboard. The fretwear pattern on this one is quite fascinating. It's mainly on the D string, and you don't notice until like the first 7 frets. So I don't think you'll have to worry about a level recrown for a while, but the frets certainly have tons of height left to them to do that. But I cleaned our fretboard and mildly polished the frets. It looks like a solder iron caught the binding right here. It's not super sharp, but you can kind of feel it if you're going for it. But as far as when you're playing, you will feel just a minor bump. There's a kind of similar phenomenon right here. A common issue on late 90s into the 2000s era of Gibson are fret nib gaps, where depending on your playing style, sometimes the high E will get caught in this small gap in between the fret nib and the fret. This is far from the worst one I've ever experienced, but yes, that one is present. Another common thing to know about these is they develop neck humps right up here. Thankfully, this one does not have that. Most people never even notice it because unless you're playing the low E string in this area, you're not even going to notice that it buzzes a bit. Someone has replaced the nut on this one. It looks very professionally done. I don't think your average buyer would even realize that was replaced, because they didn't even like damage the finish or anything. That was an impeccable job. As far as neck dimensions, the nut measures 1.68 inches, which increases to 2.06 by the 12th. And we've got a first fret neck depth of 0.92, increasing all the way to 101. Here's a look at that neck profile, first fret and 12th fret. You can see just how rounded it is on the contour gauge. That's borderlining a U-shaped neck at the first fret, but it doesn't have a lot of shoulder to it. Now we can move on to the face of the headstock. This is another difference between a regular custom and a 68 reissue. They have a different headstock angle. I'm not sure if the neck angle is also slightly different. It's not something that your average buyer will even notice. Unlike what I normally tell you about as the difference between a 68 and a normal, it just all comes down to the feel of the neck and the types of woods. But there are a lot of small, nitpicky little detailed things as well. And all these lines around the Gibson logo, as well as our custom emblem, that's just to be expected. Nothing out of the ordinary. But along with all the other parts changes, this is a regular Les Paul custom style truss rod cover, so not the correct 68 reissue. But at least you have one that reads Les Paul. Now, as far as the truss rod, it's got plenty of life left, but you do have about one thread sticking past the nut. And now that we've got it strung back up, a few other things I meant to mention. You can see the pressure from the tuner has started to delaminate the headstock's lacquer right underneath here, as well as right here. Now, eventually, those will chip, but it's only super noticeable on these two over here, at this point in time anyway. And also, in your arm resting area, if you get this in the light just right, you can see that somebody's either sweat or suntan lotion has like this little lip to it. I wonder if the blacklight test will show us more about that. But there is like some sort of a line there, but you really got to be inspecting in the light to see that. But I think this shows you that pretty good. Now moving on to the backside. Dances against the light perfectly, but again, you get it in the discerning light and you can see all the different wormings and scratches back here. So it was definitely used. Don't buy this thinking it's a mint condition collectible. The entire thing was rewired. However, it was done so well, I could see how somebody might mistake this for factory work. I mean, unless you know what you're looking for. That's another difference between standard production in this era versus the custom shop year-specific reissues, is they would have pots that would look like this without the base plate. But what we currently have in here is 500K CTS pots. It looks like they redid all of this stuff at the time when they put the vintage pickups in it to give it the factory look. And of course they upgraded it to the orange drop capacitors at that time too. Still have our metal output jack plate. And there's some dings down here, but I don't see any move strap buttons. Just oddly up here. I wonder if that was a factory boo-boo and they put it there and then somebody moved it to the proper location. That has happened. We've documented a few like that. But it could also just been they thought it would have balanced better there and then changed their mind. I just want you to be aware that that thing's there. It's not my favorite, but with the wood that they use, not that it matches in the slightest, it's kind of cool. But you can see our thin binding in the cutaway over here. And I'm kind of surprised they didn't fill in the pickguard screw holes since they're filling in other holes. But if you want to put one on, you can. But again, unfortunately, I do not have one in the case to provide with this. Just that poker chip that we talked about earlier. Look at that. Even the edges has some good chatoyancy to it. Now we can move up the backside of the neck. I didn't see any major nicks or dings. Mainly just a few minor impressions around this area. But our Grover tuners polished up beautifully. They're nice and shiny again. And here's a closer look at that serial number, 020218. Now under blacklight, well, it doesn't look like I see any sweat absorption, so it's probably some sort of a reaction to something that was on their skin, lotion, insect repellent, something like that. But nothing even shows under blacklight, so it can't be that big of a deal. I thought this was funny. The finish underneath of where the poker chip was does glow differently, so you kind of have one again. And our knobs do glow, however, I don't think they're vintage. They just look like the historic ones from this general era. Face the headstock, you can see those lifting areas that we were talking about earlier. Then the back reveals what kind of stand somebody used. It was one of those A-frame stands that has the backing along here and it sits up against it. Thankfully that didn't mar the finish up too badly though, because you don't really notice it in regular lighting. But there's our filled in strap button, in case you missed it earlier. And the other side also looks good. And thankfully, no funny business on our neck. Everything's glowing evenly here. But all said and done, this one weighs 10 pounds, 2.9 ounces. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how it sounds with these 70s and 80s pickups. I'd say the Shaw and Ttop actually pair together very well. This certainly has a very vintage tone to it, nice and chimey. Even on the neck pickup, that's got some good spank to it. With a pretty bright bridge pickup without a lot of low end to it, I guess you could say. But now we can see how it distorts. I don't know about you guys, but I think this thing sounds great. That bridge just came to life with some dirt. But as far as the common issues I talked about, fret nib gap. So what can occasionally happen is the high E string can get caught within these gaps. Now again, this example is not terrible, but if you ever find yourself bending the note off the side of the fretboard, you'll definitely feel that ridge. Really bad examples, it can actually get lodged in there and you have to yank your string out. This one's not at that stage. But for pull-offs, if your technique involves rolling it off that side, sometimes that can get interrupted. But that all depends on how you normally do it. Some guys, it never affects them. But we can test for neck humps. I don't notice any playability issues up here on this one. Sometimes you'll notice it, like if you do a big bend right here. But this one's good. So there we go, the 68 reissue with the awesome Quilt natural maple top. Is it worth putting vintage pickups in a modern guitar? In my opinion, it kind of just depends on the pickups. This particular example, I think it sounded fantastic. But if you really just want a 70s Les Paul, this isn't it. If you like the tones of them, it makes sense, and you don't jive with all the other specs, then that's a reason why this could come in handy, because, hey, most Norland eras that utilize those pickups would have a maple neck, or at the very least, once they transition back to mahogany, won't have a neck as full as this one, or have the long neck tenon. So sometimes you have to find a guitar that has the specs that you do like with the tones that those are mainly associated with. This will get you pretty close, but if your heart says you want a 70s, 80s Les Paul, just go ahead and buy one of those. In this case, it would be about the same kind of money. But this guy also has a very nice two-piece maple top with the cool figuring, which you don't normally find in that era. But remember, there's choice pieces in every time period. So if you're interested in being the next owner of this one, you can find it for sale on my website, troglysguitarshow.com. And if not, hey, I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something new. Take care.